Hey, everybody. Yeah, how's it going? Look, I wanted to make a Deltarune video. I've just finished playing Chapter 4. Well, I probably replaying it is the right thing to say. And, yeah, I think I've played something like 90 plus hours, and I just want to talk about the game, talk about some of the thoughts, some of the feelings I had, and just yell into the void if possible. Now, I had originally planned a more comprehensive overview of my thoughts and where I thought the story was going, but that was incredibly scattered. So instead, I'm going to just focus on one idea and touch on all of the other stuff in future videos. Right now, I'm going to pick a topic that I think matters, obviously, but also touches on all of the other stuff that I will want to talk about in the future. So yeah, look, without further ado, Sans had sex with my mom. Yeah, so spoilers for Chapter 4, spoilers for Deltarune, yada yada yada. Look, quick recap. At the end of Chapter 4, we close the Dark Fountain in the church. Susie and Kris make it back to Chris's house. And we just want to get in, we want to relax, we want to unwind. Just defeated a Titan. We had a lot of crazy reveals about the prophecy and what lies ahead. We had a lot of kind of emotional breakthroughs and some scary premonitions of what might be ahead of us. And I think Kris, Susie, the player, we were all looking forward to getting home and unpacking a little bit what had just happened. And what do we see instead? Yeah, Toriel, Sans, doing the jitterbug. And look, I'm not here to blame Sans, I'm not here to blame Toriel. They're their own people, they're doing their own thing. But the timing couldn't be worse. And even outside of the timing of what we just experienced on that day, that night, I think it's still pretty hard for Kris to see that, to walk in and see that regardless of what he had just experienced. And it's also a pretty important moment for Susie as well, because I think it's the first time she views Toriel as not being the perfect mom, that like if something were really going wrong they could just go to Toriel. But at this moment she enters the house and we see her pretty drunk, she's calling her snoozy and just being a bit of a fool. And I think it's that the humanization of Toriel to Susie at this moment also maybe makes her say, yeah, well, actually, I guess I have to do this by myself, or we can't involve you. So anyway, Susie doesn't want to be in this awkward situation any longer either. She pieces out. She has the luxury of being able to leave, but that leaves Kris alone in this situation. And I really wish he had stayed, because I think I needed help processing, and I think Kris needed somebody to give them stability. So why is this so difficult for Kris? Or why is this having such an impact? Or why do I think it matters? Kris has long experienced this kind of instability in his life, especially when it comes to his parents. I mean, they've been separated for quite a while. I think we can imagine it's been since Des's disappearance. But regardless, we are seeing Kris put into this position where they are in between his parents in some way. Toriel has no interest in Asgore from what we can see, and if anything she's interested in moving on. Whereas Asgore is pretty pathetically, stalking Toriel just to get a moment to talk with her, to try and set up something to plan for a way that they can all act as a family, which is generally something Toriel seems to be against. Azriel has gone off to college. Des, as I mentioned, has disappeared. Noelle is kind of with Birdley now. They're not really close anymore. And there's just this general theme of social isolation for Kris that really isn't addressed or broken through until they have this Chapter 1 adventure with Susie. I think as well, it's really telling that we have this option to drink the hot chocolate in Chapter 1, and it leads to Kris essentially welling up, tearing up a bit, thinking about Azriel and I guess the past. And then when we have the option to have a similar experience with Susie, Kris loves it. We see them drawing together, and this is something completely within Kris's control. So we know that this is Kris's opinion. It's not just the player. And Kris writes something in the corner, which makes Susie say, "Oh, Kris, I can never tell if you're being serious or not." And I would like to believe it's something very cute like, "I love you," or "You're my best friend." Something very sweet. But the point I'm making is that they crave this. This is something Kris has been lacking a lot of. We see it in school where they're like the black sheep or the third wheel on everybody's friend group. But with Susie, this is no longer the case. But when Susie leaves at the end of chapter 4, Kris is almost put back into that state of isolation. Anyway, so the actual scene itself. I've seen people talking about it and they say, look, they're just dancing, they're just joking. It's an innuendo, but it doesn't actually mean it. And I strongly disagree. I mean, there's ketchup in the fridge. Somebody's cleaned the white fur out of the pipes. And I really don't want to think about the batter that's all over the stove. And even outside of little jokes. When we go up to bed, there is a joking, dancing drum badum-tish crescendo that builds and builds and builds until a climax of some sort, loud enough for Kris to hear, and it just stops. So yeah, Sansa's definitely having sex with my mom. I mean, you could choose to read it as like not literal, but I think regardless, either way, it doesn't matter. I think he's literally having sex with her, but for Kris, this must be really hard. Their parents are separated. Their mom is dancing downstairs with a complete stranger. For all intents and purposes, you met this man maybe 2 days ago. And as well, at this time that you need her the most, if there was ever a time I needed a hug, now would be the time. But you can't even turn off the music. You can turn up the music, but you can't turn it off. And it kind of harkens back for me to what Susie said in chapter 1, where our choices don't matter. We are again like in this very small scene being put back into this state of having no control. And as well, I think it's interesting, it's when Susie is gone. So anyway, after being traumatized, we get a call from this outside force that is controlling or manipulating Kris. That seems to reiterate, don't forget you promised. And this seems to be the main thing that is keeping Kris separate from just general normalcy. This is something I'm going to touch on a lot more later, but I think the situation that we see in Kris's house is indicative of Kris's life for the past, I don't know how long. This lack of control, this inability to connect with anyone around him has left Kris in this position where they're quite susceptible to being manipulated by somebody. Now, who's manipulating him? It seems to be Carol on one end, the Knight on the other. If they're in cahoots, we don't know. I'll talk about that later at some other point. But I kind of think that Carol is using Kris to protect Noelle, potentially at the expense of Susie. And the only reason Kris is going along with this plan, or these multiple plans, these double, triple truces, is because their agency has been so undermined so frequently in the past. Look, I don't think it's the most important scene in the whole series, but also I kinda do. It happens right at the end of chapter 4, which is the halfway point, and I think it signals, why Kris is doing what they are doing. It's a little look into the day-to-day life of Kris, when what we've previously seen is extraordinary adventures. The dance isn't just an awkward gag, it represents they really don't have any agency at this point in their life. And it's this lack of agency that informs to me why Kris is still going along with plans that they aren't comfortable with. They openly reject the weird route, and they seem to have a lot of problems with the night. And even with Carol, there seems to be this strange relationship that I don't know if Toriel would be okay with. Look, maybe I'm just projecting. Maybe it's just me who has a problem with Sans sleeping with my mom. But I think it is kind of a striking scene. Yeah, I think it really shows what Kris's life is like without Susie. And again, interestingly enough, when Susie leaves the house, we essentially have no more agency. Last point, I don't want anyone to think that this is me saying, oh, these are bad characters now, or these guys suck. I know that there have been people online who are going to view it that way, and I've seen some interesting videos already. This is partially what prompted me to talk about this. But I think these characters have always been flawed, and their own perspective isn't allowing them to see the larger consequences of their actions right now. Now, maybe with Sans, he is actually more aware than we're giving him credit for, because his insistence on Toriel to ditch choir practice and go drinking and dancing with him meant that Toriel and all of the choir weren't in the church when the Dark World was opened, which I can imagine would be very dangerous if you had all of these Lightners in the Dark World while a Titan was brought into existence. So Sans did maybe actually just do it for the good of the world. Maybe Sans banged her mom for the good of everybody. And I have to come to terms with that. But right now, I'm kind of stuck viewing it from maybe how Kris is experiencing it right now. Okay, that is it for now. I have some other topics I really want to touch on. This video was me just getting something out for right now, something that touched on a lot of themes that I want to talk about later in a lot more depth. But this felt like the most manageable thing I could get out today. Yeah, I guess just in future, we're going to be talking about Carol, we're going to be talking about the night, we're going to be talking about Des, Asgore, the prophecy, what the weird route's all about, and Susie and Noelle's fate. But first, just for this, I thought we better talk about the most important scene in all of Deltarune. Boning.